The ball was already in the air when the crowd went silent. Not the polite, breath-held silence of a Sunday leader on the back nine. This was something else. Something colder. The kind of silence that falls when 50,000 people simultaneously realize they might be watching something they will never, ever see again. Cameras froze. Caddies froze. Even the wind, which had been whipping across that fairway all afternoon, seemed to pause, as if the atmosphere itself needed a moment to process what was happening. He had been down 3 strokes with 4 holes left. The math was brutal. The lie was worse. His ball had buried itself in a patch of rough so thick and unforgiving that 3 other players earlier that day had simply punched out sideways and accepted the damage. The safe play was obvious. Everyone watching knew it. His caddy knew it. His coach, watching from behind a hospitality tent with his arms crossed and his jaw tight, knew it. And yet, this man, this golfer who had spent the last 2 years quietly rebuilding himself from the inside out, stepped up to that ball, took one long breath, and did something that will be talked about in locker rooms, sports bars, and YouTube comment sections for the next decade. What happened in the next 4 seconds didn't just change the leaderboard. It changed the conversation about what's actually possible in professional golf. And the story behind how he got to that exact moment? That's what nobody is telling you. If you're new here and you love stories that go deeper than the highlight reel, stories about real human pressure, real breaking points, and real moments of genius, this channel is built exactly for you. Hit subscribe before this story pulls you in too far to remember. To understand that shot, you have to go back. Not to last season. Not to last year. You have to go back to a hotel room in Scottsdale, Arizona, on a Tuesday night in February, 2 years before anyone would call this man's name on a Sunday afternoon. He was sitting on the edge of a bed, still in his golf shoes, staring at a scorecard he hadn't shown anyone. Not his agent. Not his swing coach. Not his wife, who was downstairs in the lobby waiting to hear how the Pro-Am had gone. The number on that card wasn't just bad. It was the kind of number that makes a man in his early 30s wonder whether the story he had been telling himself, about talent, about potential, about being built for this, was ever actually true. There's a particular type of exhaustion that elite athletes don't talk about publicly. It's not physical. The body can be tuned and maintained and pushed past almost any limit with the right team around it. What's harder to fix, what no sports science in the world has fully cracked, is the exhaustion that sets in when you've been trying to become great for so long that you've forgotten what it felt like to simply be good. When every round carries the weight of proving something. When the game stops being a game and starts being a verdict. He had been ranked inside the top 30 in the world 3 years earlier. He had a win on tour. He had the resume that should have meant a certain kind of career trajectory. But somewhere between the victory speech and this Tuesday night in Scottsdale, the trajectory had bent. And the bending had been quiet, which is almost always the most dangerous kind. Think about someone in your own life who appeared fine from the outside while quietly coming apart on the inside. That silent unraveling is one of the loneliest human experiences there is. He didn't tell anyone what was on that scorecard. He ordered room service, turned on whatever was playing on the hotel television, and made a decision so small that he almost didn't notice making it. He decided to stop trying to be the golfer everyone expected him to be and start figuring out who he actually was without all the noise. That decision led him to a putting green in rural North Carolina, working with a coach most people on tour had never heard of. Not a swing mechanic, not a data analyst, a man who had spent 30 years studying the psychological architecture of performance, what he called the space between knowing how and actually doing it. His method was unconventional enough that some of the players who'd worked with him refused to discuss it publicly. The sessions weren't filmed. The conversations weren't transcribed. What happened on that putting green stayed on that putting green. What we do know, from people close to the situation, is that he stopped talking about mechanics for 3 months. No launch angles. No attack angles. No strokes gained statistics. He just played. He played badly and didn't analyze it. He played well and didn't celebrate it. He played in the rain and in the heat and in the dark until his hands knew the club the way a musician's hands know the instrument. Not through thought, but through something older than thought. By the time he returned to competitive golf, something in his eyes had shifted. Not dramatically, not in a way that would make headlines. But those who knew him well, who had watched him in the years of frustration and performance anxiety, noticed it immediately. He was quieter, more deliberate. like a man who had stopped rehearsing his answers and started just telling the truth. His results that first season back were modest. A few top 20s. A couple of cuts made that most people wouldn't bother writing about. But anyone paying close attention would have noticed something in the numbers that statistics don't easily capture. He was playing without fear. Not playing well, necessarily, but playing without the flinch. Without the hesitation that had crept into his game like a slow leak over 3 years of trying too hard. And then came that tournament. That course. That week. The conditions on Thursday morning were some of the worst the event had seen in years. Wind gusts pushing 40 kilometers per hour off the water, the greens running faster than almost anyone had practiced on, and a setup that the tour's own officials quietly admitted was borderline punishing. 23 players failed to break 80 on opening day. 14 more hit scores, so high they effectively eliminated themselves before the weekend. He shot a 69. Not because the conditions were easier for him, because he had stopped fighting the conditions. His playing partner that day, a veteran who had 4 top 10s at this event alone, said afterward, with something that sounded like genuine bewilderment. He played like the wind didn't exist, like he'd already agreed with the course before the round started. Friday was tighter, Saturday tighter still. By Sunday morning, he sat 3 shots back of the leader, a player whose consistency and mental composure had been the defining story of the season. A player who, on his best days, simply did not make mistakes. 3 shots with 18 holes left is not impossible. But it is, by any reasonable mathematical reading, unlikely. The kind of gap that turns Sunday into a survival exercise rather than a chase. Here's where it gets complicated. Here's where the real debate starts, and honestly, I want to know where you stand on this. Do you believe certain athletes are simply built differently for pressure, or do you think anyone can be trained to perform in moments like this? Because what happened over the next 3 hours challenges everything we think we know about the answer. He birdied the second, birdied the fourth. The gap was closing, but the leader was steady, patient, giving nothing away. Through the turn, 1 shot back, and then came the 13th hole. 13 is one of those holes that course designers build with quiet cruelty. It looks manageable from the tee. The fairway is wide enough. The green is visible. But the fairway slopes hard left toward a patch of rough that the groundskeeping crew had let grow specifically for this week. Knee-high in places, dense and unpredictable in all of them. 3 players earlier in the day had found that rough and walked away with double bogeys. One had taken a triple. His drive was good. 90% of players in that field would have been satisfied with it. But the 10% that mattered had drifted, not by much, but enough. The ball settled just inside the rough line, maybe 40 feet into grass that had no business being part of a professional golf course. Distance to the flag, 174 yards. Wind, directly into his face, gusting. Pin position, back right, tucked behind a bunker with almost no margin. His caddy walked the lie twice. Came back and said the word out. Meaning, take your medicine. Punch sideways onto the fairway. Give yourself a pitch and a putt, and accept the par or the bogey and fight the next 5 holes. He stood over the ball for 11 seconds. Cameras captured his face. Still, not frozen still. There is a difference, and anyone who has ever watched elite athletes in the extremity of competition knows the difference. Frozen is fear that hasn't moved. Still is something that has moved through fear and come out the other side. He took the 7-iron. Not the punch-out club. Not the safe play. The 7-iron, full swing, aimed at a window between the rough and the bunker and the wind and the back right pin that was, by any honest calculation, almost impossibly narrow. If you've ever watched someone do something that you knew in your bones was either genius or catastrophe, and you couldn't tell which until the last possible second, then you know exactly what those 50,000 people felt in that moment. This is what it looks like when someone has genuinely made peace with losing. When they're not playing to not lose. When they're playing to be exactly who they decided to become on a putting green in North Carolina 2 years ago. The ball came out low, unnervingly low. The crowd made a sound. Not a cheer, not a gasp, something in between, something that has no name. It climbed. The wind pushed at it, and it held its line anyway. Not fighting the wind, working with it, reading it the way a sailor reads a gust. It cleared the rough. It cleared the bunker. It landed on the back portion of the green, took 1 bounce, and rolled, slowly, impossibly slowly, to within 8 inches of the cup. 8 inches. If you've ever had a moment where everything you've worked for, everything you've doubted, everything you quietly refused to give up on suddenly made sense all at once, tap the screen. You already know this story isn't really about golf. He made the putt. He birdied the 14th. The leader, for the first time all week, made a bogey on the 15th. By the time they walked up the 18th fairway, the tournament had turned completely. The scoreboard told one story. The faces told another. Because the leader wasn't just losing a lead anymore. He was watching someone play from a place that's very hard to compete against, the place beyond fear. He won by 2. But the number on the trophy wasn't the thing people talked about in the parking lot. Wasn't the thing that trended that night. Wasn't the reason this video exists. The thing that people talked about was that 7-iron. That 11-second stillness. That ball rising against the wind on a 13th hole in front of 50,000 people who had already written the safe play into their mental scorecards. What makes a shot impossible isn't the physics. Physics is just math. What makes a shot impossible is the weight of the moment. The 2 years of quiet work, the Tuesday night in a hotel room with a scorecard you don't show anyone, the putting green in North Carolina with a coach whose name won't trend on social media. Impossibility is a story we tell ourselves about the gap between who we are and who we need to be. And some people, in some moments, simply stop believing that story. He didn't say much in the post-round interview. Asked about the 13, he paused for a moment and said something that will stick with me for a long time. He said, "I wasn't trying to be brave. I just knew that was the shot." That's the whole story. That's all of it. Not talent. Not data. Not even courage in the heroic sense. Just a man who had done enough quiet, honest work that when the moment arrived, he knew what the shot was. And he trusted himself enough to take it. If you're the kind of person who believes the deeper story matters, that what happens in the hotel rooms and the practice greens and the 2 a.m. decisions shapes what the world sees on Sunday afternoons, then you're exactly who this channel is built for. Don't let the algorithm bury the next story. You know what to do.